My name is Harper Dawson. I'm 33 years old, an interior designer in Boston, and I used to think I was about to marry the man of my dreams. But have you ever seen your fiancé's wedding photos? In another woman's hands. I have. It was a Monday morning. An anonymous link led me to a luxurious wedding photo shoot set to grace the cover of Vogue. The groom was wearing a white tuxedo standing in a sea of calla lilies. And I wasn't the bride. I'd been with him for 5 years. We lived together, co-signed a lease, built a vision for our future. But in the end, I was just a placeholder, part of a long-term strategy crafted by his mother. What would you do if you found out the man you loved and his entire family had been lying to you for half a decade? Leave a comment if you've ever felt that way. And stay with me, because the story I'm about to tell you, I met Graham Whitmore on a fall afternoon over 5 years ago at a contemporary architecture exhibit in Boston. I was looking for inspiration for a kitchen remodel project, and he was standing in the reclaimed pine wood section, arms crossed, smiling like the world revolved around him. Graham had a way of making you feel special, not with compliments, but with his eyes, like you were the only one he truly wanted to hear. We talked for 2 hours about natural light, exposed ceilings, and raw brick. That night he drove me home in his vintage silver convertible and texted me, "I've never met someone who understands space the way you do." That's how it started. Coffee dates turned into dinners, weekends driving out to Cape Cod just to watch the winter ocean. A year later I moved into his apartment in Back Bay, a place far out of my income range, but Graham always said, "You bring the love, I bring the money. That's fair." I believed that once. Then came the evenings at his family's estate in Marblehead. Elaine, Graham's mother, greeted me with a gentle hug and a glass of white wine. "Harper, the girl really has an eye for design," she said after I gave feedback on the Thanksgiving tablescape. His father, Harold, would often wink and say, "If you pick her, I've got no objections." I used to think I was their future daughter-in-law. They knew I wasn't from old money, but they also knew I was hardworking, independent, and had never taken a single thing from their son. Except my love. In our 3rd year, Graham brought me to his cousin's wedding in Rhode Island. When I was seated at the main table, next to their family's business partners, I was stunned and happy. For the first time, I felt like I truly belonged. Graham held my hand beneath the table and whispered, "Mile day it'll be our wedding." I believed that. Until last month, when I saw those wedding photos. I still remember the dress I wore when we went house hunting in Newton. A quaint olive green home with a wide porch where I imagined planting lavender. "I even saved the sketch I drew of the twin nursery," he said. "When we have kids, we'll add a side door for easier nighttime check-ins." But it was all a performance. I later learned that for the past 5 years, Charlotte Montgomery, the only daughter of a Connecticut state senator, had been studying at Harvard Law. And the wedding had been arranged long before I even met Graham. What was I in that game? A pawn, a decoy, the appropriate girlfriend to keep things quiet while they waited for the real bride to return. Do you know what it's like to realize you were never truly loved? Not because you weren't enough, but because you weren't from the right circle? I don't remember how long I cried that night. I just remember standing in front of the mirror, staring at a woman I no longer recognized. Everything, love, hope, the future I thought we shared, had been props in a script I was never invited to help write. And the worst part, I had loved completely. Loved him, loved his family, trusted them like my own. And they had all sat around dinner tables, toasted glasses, smiled at me, while secretly counting down to the real wedding. But this isn't where it ends, and I knew, if I stayed silent, I'd forever be dismissed as the bitter ex-girlfriend. They thought I'd stay quiet. They were wrong. I remember that morning was freezing. The wind slapped my face like it wanted to wake me up from my delusions. Still I went. Still wore the coat Graham gave me last Christmas. Still hoped that if I talked to him face to face, the truth would straighten itself out. The Whitmore gates didn't open. I rang the bell, no answer. By the 3rd time, a broad-shouldered man in a black suit appeared. Not the butler. Security. "Ms. Dawson, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore are not accepting visitors today. I froze. I need to speak to Graham. This is personal. He shook his head. Cold. Firm. I've been instructed not to let you in. Before I could react, a side door opened. Elaine Whitmore stepped out, holding a white porcelain coffee mug, as composed as if she were heading to water her garden. Harper, she said, like a mother catching her daughter making a poor decision. You shouldn't have come. I stood still, gripping the folder Graham had left at my place. You knew all along, didn't you? She stared at me for a long moment, then sighed like she was tolerating a child who still didn't understand. You have heart, Harper, but heart isn't enough, not in our world. Our world? I echoed, my throat tightening. Graham needs a partner who can elevate him, politically, financially, socially. Charlotte Montgomery is that partner. I bit my lip. And what am I? Elaine wasn't angry. She wasn't even irritated. She simply didn't care. You were part of his growth, but the path ends here. And with that she turned away. I stood before their iron gates, so cold I could no longer see my reflection in the car's side mirror. Every mask they had ever worn, the warmth, the compliments, even the line "Harper has great taste," melted into nothing. That afternoon Graham came by, not to explain, but to ease the tension. I'm sorry you found out that way, he said, sitting across from me in the apartment we once shared. I should have prepared you. But things got complicated. Complicated? I laughed bitterly. I gave you 5 years of my life, and all along you swore it was love. I had your house key. You said we'd buy a house together, and it's complicated? Graham wouldn't meet my eyes. I did care. It wasn't fake. I saw something in his eyes. Maybe shame? But not enough to be regret. Then why are you marrying her? He swallowed. Because my future's with her. You know that, Harper. You're practical. You understand. I looked at the man who had once been the love of my life, and I could barely breathe. Not because he betrayed me, but because he believed I would accept it, as if I were just as pragmatic as the rest of them. Then he said something that nearly brought me to my knees. We can still stay connected. I'll always care about you, even if we're no longer together. I stayed silent, rose to my feet, and pointed to the door, holding back tears until he left. 3 days later, I received an email from a major furniture corporation, one I was about to sign a contract with to design their new headquarters. We regret to inform you that we must cancel the partnership due to a shift in investment direction. The representative, a close friend of Harold Whitmore? Graham's father. I sat alone in the empty apartment, the late afternoon light pouring through the large window we once picked out together because it lets in soft light on lazy weekend mornings. And all I wanted was to disappear. It wasn't the job. It wasn't the betrayal. It was the fact that I could no longer trust my own judgment. Had I been that wrong? Wrong to believe in love? Wrong to think I was chosen for who I was, not as a temporary fixture in someone else's grand plan? I didn't know. All I knew was that by then I had lost almost everything. Love, career, trust. And the only thing left was a fragile thread of self-respect. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold on to it. I can't remember how many days I spent moving between the bed and the armchair by the window. Each morning, when sunlight crept through the curtains, I felt like I was being forced to exist one more day, in a life that no longer felt like mine. Food lost its taste, words left my mouth, even my phone became a stranger, used only to silence notifications from people who once called themselves friends, now gossiping like they'd never sat at my dinner table. They called me the bitter ex, the jealous girlfriend who couldn't handle the truth, the woman envious of the wedding of the century. I deleted all my social media, blocked dozens of contacts, disconnected the doorbell. I didn't want to hear anything from the outside world anymore. And then one afternoon the door opened. Tessa, my younger sister, walked in with a rolling suitcase, a bag of takeout in hand, and a face full of fury and heartbreak. How long are you planning to hide in this shell? I said nothing, but the tears came. Tessa didn't say another word. She set her suitcase down, cleaned up the kitchen, opened the fridge, made ramen, and poured 2 glasses of wine. Then she sat beside me, handed me a spoon, and gently said, "Eat, if not for yourself, then for me." Tessa is 4 years younger than I am, but in moments like this, she felt like my older sister. The next day, she took me to the same therapy center her friend went to, after a messy divorce. I stayed silent through the entire first session, but during the second, I surprised myself by saying out loud, "I don't know who I am anymore." The therapist nodded, didn't ask anything. "Then that's where we'll begin." In the days that followed, Tessa pushed me to go on morning walks. By the 3rd week, she signed me up for a boxing class. "Hit it," she said, handing me a pair of brand new gloves. "Not for revenge, but to remember you're still alive." And I hit. Every punch released another layer of bitterness. Elaine Whitmore's patronizing words. Old friends' pitying glances. Graham's once sweet whispers beneath the firelight. All exposed as part of a play. I wasn't ready to forgive, but at least I was breathing again. A month after everything collapsed, I returned to my studio, the place where I once created designs that made clients smile. Dust had settled. A draft sketch I'd left unfinished was still sitting on the table. Tessa was the first to say the harsh truth I hadn't dared admit to myself. "You didn't lose Graham. You lost the illusion of someone who never really existed." That sentence sliced deep into my heart. But it was the kind of cut needed to drain out all the poison. And it was during those evenings, sitting together eating cold pizza, listening to Graham's old voicemails, reviewing past social media posts, that we realized something. I wasn't the only victim. Charlotte Montgomery was also stepping into a marriage built on calculation, a contract tied to financial, political, and social gain. And me? I had been trapped in a temporary role for 5 years, just to make sure nothing went off script. Tessa rested her chin in her palm and looked at me. "You've got 2 choices. Keep living in silence, or speak up for the truth." I looked back at the documents I had kept. Emails, messages, even design sketches Graham and I created for our so-called dream home. I began to understand this wasn't just personal anymore. This was about dignity. About being recognized as a human being, not a prop on someone else's stage. And I knew I couldn't return to who I was. But I could stand up and move forward in a different way. This time, not to hold on to anyone, but to reclaim my voice. I still remember the night Theo knocked on my door, laptop in hand, eyes blazing with urgency and rage. "You need to see this," he said, not even bothering to take off his coat. "Right now." We sat on the couch, and when the screen lit up, the headline appeared loud and clear. Vogue exclusive, the wedding of the decade, the Whitmore-Montgomery union to air live on East Coast Channel. 2 weeks ago, I was still sharing a home with Graham, planning our future, one paint color at a time. Now his wedding was being produced like a reality TV show. Lavish, curated, more public than any Hollywood film. Theo scrolled through the coverage. They're branding them as the East Coast's new power couple, Charlotte the Harvard lawyer, Graham, the founding director of a $200 million real estate project. He paused. "And you?" Not a single line, like you never existed. I couldn't even name the feeling. It wasn't pain anymore, just a hollow quiet I couldn't shake. I stood up, opened a drawer, and pulled out a dark brown notebook Graham had left behind, or maybe just didn't bother taking. On the last page was a sketch of a farmhouse-style home with a wide backyard. Below it, in his familiar handwriting, "Harper's room faces the morning sun." On the next page was a message he sent me exactly 2 weeks ago. "What do you think about going to Maine this spring to look for land?" And a selfie we took while passing a lavender field. He was hugging me from behind, smiling softly. I thought I was holding on to a memory, but it turned out I was holding evidence. Tessa said nothing, her eyes scanning the pages, her face unreadable. He kept up the act until the very end. We thought we knew everything, but what nearly knocked the wind out of me came days later. Sent by Theo, a contract, signatures clear as day. Elaine Whitmore, Charlotte Montgomery. Legal representatives from both sides. Title: Family Protection, Reproduction, and Legacy Agreement. I had to read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. One of the clauses stated, "The female party agrees not to undertake any action affecting pregnancy without written consent from the male party or the male party's family." In other words, if Charlotte became pregnant, she had no autonomy over her own body. I clutched the printed document so tightly my fingertips turned white. This wasn't just emotional betrayal anymore. This was an entire power structure, a system where women were chosen, controlled, and labeled worthy if they were born into the right families and kept their mouths shut. I once believed Charlotte was the one inheriting glory built on my pain, but now I began to understand maybe she was just another pawn selected for being suitable, just like I had been, in a different place on the board. Tessa flipped to the next page. "If this leaks to the public, not their reputation," Theo said quietly, "but their entire political future will explode. This is the kind of document no one wants ending up in the press." I sat there for a long time, still, my mind spinning between fury, disbelief, and one thing that felt unshakably clear. I couldn't let this disappear. Not for revenge, but so no one else would become me, or Charlotte, in a game where every decision was made in advance, by people who never saw women as full human beings. I met Theo's eyes, then Tessa's. Neither of them needed me to speak. They already knew we had enough truth. And I knew exactly what I would do with it. I've never been someone who likes causing a scene. For years, I chose kindness, chose to be polite even when disrespected. I once thought silence was a form of maturity. But sometimes, if you don't speak up, someone else will rewrite your story in a way that makes you disappear. The first meeting took place at the apartment of Miles and June, my closest friends since college. Miles is an intellectual property attorney, rigid, principled, and won't lift a finger unless it's legally airtight. June is the opposite, an independent journalist, sharp, fearless, and known for digging into sensitive investigations. Tessa, Theo, and I brought everything we had gathered: photos, emails, handwritten notes, the reproduction clause, even a video of Graham hugging me at a ski cabin 2 months ago, while he was already officially engaged to Charlotte. Miles flipped through the documents slowly. "This will be explosive, but it has to be done right. No edits, no exaggerations. Everything must be verifiable truth." June nodded. "I'll prepare 2 versions of the report. One if we can publish right after the wedding. The other in case media access gets blocked. Then I'll use my independent network and local station contacts." "What if they sue?" "They might try to scare you," Miles said, calm. "But with what you've got, and if you don't embellish a single word, they won't dare go to court. The truth is what terrifies them most." We mapped out the ceremony layout, screen placement, where Graham would stand, guest entrance paths, broadcast camera angles, and the exact moment the wedding music would begin. Theo coordinated a plan to access the hotel's AV system, not to sabotage, but to insert real images at the precise moment of the vows. He's a media expert with former ties to major agencies and had a contact on the production team for the channel airing the wedding. "We're not here to cause chaos. No screaming, no scenes, no public humiliation," I said firmly. "I just want to tell the truth, in a place where they can't look away." Tessa squeezed my hand. "You won't be doing this alone." 3 days later, we split up the roles. June dug into hotel details. The ceremony would take place outdoors beside a rose garden within the grounds of an upscale resort. Guests would have their IDs checked at the gate, but anyone with a vendor badge or backup crew list might get through. Miles handled the legal side. He drafted a written statement where I simply recounted facts, no assumptions, no offensive language. It would be printed and ready to hand to media reps in case of confrontation. Theo discreetly contacted a friend on the video team. He confirmed he could give us 3 minutes of projection time on the main screen. Not long enough to create panic, but just enough for the entire wedding to see. The hallway leading to the bridal suite was so long and quiet, I could hear each echo of my heels on the polished wood floor. I never imagined I'd meet Charlotte Montgomery like this. Barefaced, hair undone, wedding dress sliding off one shoulder, eyes red and glassy like she'd just crawled out of a silent panic. She stumbled forward, face pale, gripping a phone, not hers. It was Graham's. Our eyes met in the corridor lined with white orchids. I stood still. She froze. And in that moment, all the flash, the couture gown, the live broadcast, the Vogue spread, fell away. It was just two women. Charlotte looked at me with a kind of broken confusion. I just read everything, she said, voice trembling. The emails, messages, photos, even the voice memo where he called you his safe place. I'm guessing he never said that to you, did he? She let out a faint, bitter laugh. I heard plenty, but it was all perfectly rehearsed. Did he ever love you? She asked. No bitterness, no defense. Just a woman, clinging to the last hope that maybe, at some point, this had been real for someone. I looked into her eyes. I used to think so, I said. Now I hope you don't need that answer. Charlotte looked down, as if my words had confirmed her worst fear. I didn't comfort her, we were strangers, pushed into the same rigged game, each dealt different hands, but neither of us the dealer. My father's out there, she whispered, eyes staring past me as if she could see the grand hall awaiting her entrance. He spent months negotiating that project deal with Graham's family. My mother commissioned my dress from Paris, and I've told everyone I'm happy. A painful smile formed at the corner of her lips. I wanted to say something, but Charlotte looked up, her eyes lit with a quiet kind of resolve. What are you going to do? I asked. She tightened her grip on the phone in her hand. Maybe, for the first time in my life, I'll do something that isn't for anyone else. The first sound wasn't loud, just Graham's sigh, buried under light static from the phone recording. But when his voice came through, low, steady, and unmistakable, the entire room fell silent, like someone had pulled the air out of the grand ballroom, dressed in white flowers and warm golden light. Harper was always easy to manage. Keeping her close made things simpler. No one questioned me when I said I was working late or away on business. She trusted me so much. All I had to do was smile and everything would be fine, simple. That moment, in the center of the ballroom, the sound of forks and knives came to a halt, all 400 guests froze in place. No murmurs, no music. Just Graham's voice, raw, shameless, and impossible to deny. I stood at the edge of the hall, unhidden. I let them hear, and let him expose himself. Elaine Whitmore shot to her feet, face pale with rage. The pearl-colored silk gown couldn't hide the tremble in her hands. You are such a petty woman, Harper. Ruining someone else's wedding over a few petty emotions. Pathetic. Before I could speak, a deep male voice rose from table 6. The head table. What are you calling petty when you're the one who drafted the annulment contract in case Charlotte didn't get pregnant within 18 months? All heads turned. It was Edgar Collies, the chairman of a major investment fund in New York and a longtime friend of the Montgomerys. Elaine froze, her face drained. You? What did you just say? Mr. Collis raised a hand, not loud, but commanding. I saw the paperwork, including the clause about asset restructuring if Charlotte dared to walk away from the marriage. You really think the girl doesn't know? Whispers rippled through the crowd. A few guests covered their mouths. A woman leaned toward her husband and whispered, My God, is this a wedding or a business transaction? June, my friend, was in the back with a few unnamed reporters. I knew their recorders were rolling, quietly, catching every word. Elaine stepped forward, trying to regain control. Everything she showed is false. It's edited. At that moment, Dale switched the screen to part 2. A string of emails between Graham and me, spanning 2 years, alongside screenshots from Google Drive. Floor plans of our house, shared design files from our so-called future. I walked to the center of the room. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. Mrs. Elaine, if I were petty, I would have released everything 6 months ago when I noticed Graham vanishing every time there was a meeting with the Montgomerys. But I stayed silent. I wanted to believe he still needed time to tell me the truth. I turned to Graham. He stood frozen on the far side of the wedding stage, tie slightly askew, sweat beading on his forehead. But the truth is, he never intended to, because to them I was just a placeholder, a shadow to hide the real plan until it was ready. Some shook their heads. Others left their seats. Cameras clicked. I looked toward Charlotte's parents standing near the exit. Her mother was crying into her hand. Senator Montgomery stared at Elaine with a hollow expression, and I knew, no matter what happened next, the mask they'd used to craft their iconic wedding had fallen. And no one could piece it back together, like nothing had ever happened. 3 days after the ruined wedding, I received a thick envelope, delivered express, no note included. Inside was a check. The amount written in careful black ink so large saying it aloud would make some people hesitate. The top corner of the envelope bore the Whitmore Holdings logo. I sat still in my small apartment, the same place where Graham and I once brewed coffee together every morning, and stared at that number as if it were a price tag on shame. Here was no apology, no ownership of what they'd done, only money, offered like it could wash it all away. I picked up a pair of scissors, cut the check into pieces, carefully, like peeling off a dead layer of skin, then sealed it in a new envelope with a handwritten note. I don't need the money, I just need myself back. The next day, June handed me a letter. From Charlotte. Harper, I know no one can apologize on behalf of Graham or what her family did to you, but I want to say thank you for not staying silent. I used to think I was strong because I knew when to nod and when to speak carefully, but watching you stand up made me realize silence isn't composure. Sometimes it's just another way to self-destruct. I've moved to Washington. I don't know if I can change anything, but at the very least, I won't let anyone else decide who I am again. If someday you want to meet, just to sit quietly, I'll always be there. I read the last line through blurred eyes. Turns out, I wasn't alone in standing so close to the edge, and chose to step into the light. That same week, a man named Victor Nguyen, partner at a tech investment fund in New York, reached out to me after reading June's article in a design publication. You had the courage to stand up, he said. Though I believe you can design spaces for people who are learning to stand again too. They wanted me to design their new office in Soho, open layout, natural light, a space for healing and reconnection. I said yes, not for the size of the project but because I was chosen, for who I was. Not for who I was dating. Every day I walked into the studio, I saw a glimpse of my younger self again, the Harper who once dreamed of a space for quiet dreams. Revenge no longer tempted me. I didn't need to see anyone fall to find my strength. What I craved was space. Wide enough to never again live in someone else's shadow. 1 year later, I live in a small third-floor apartment in the Alberta district of Portland. It has a balcony overlooking a row of old maple trees, their leaves rustling every morning like whispers that don't need a listener. The place is under 900 square feet, but for the first time in years I chose every chair, every light bulb, every color of paint. No one gave feedback, no one said, "That's not trendy enough." I wake early each morning, brew my coffee, play soft jazz, and start my work. The small studio I built with a few female collaborators, mostly women who also walked away from broken relationships, has become a known space in the women's startup scene. We don't call it an office. We call it a place to return, not fast, just real. I've also started writing, slowly, deliberately, about what I went through. Not to recount a betrayal, but to better understand what I now call the betrayal of silence. That moment when you can't even name the pain, but it seeps in, day by day, night by night, until you no longer recognize yourself. The book doesn't have a title yet, it might never be published, but every time I write a little more I feel a bit lighter, as if each sentence is another step away from who I used to be. As for love? Yes, I've started dating again. Some of them are architects, some are chefs, some simply know how to listen without needing to ask too many questions. I'm not ready to love the old way again, completely, without guard, but I'm no longer afraid of feeling either. I've learned how to listen to my own heart without needing someone else to validate whether it's worth listening to. And then, one evening in March, while I was sharing a glass of wine with Tessa on the balcony, my phone buzzed. A message from Theo. Guess what? Graham just got engaged, this time to a CEO at an investment bank in Chicago. I stared at the screen for a while, then set the phone down on the table and took another sip of wine. Tessa tilted her head and looked at me. You okay? I just hope she knows whether she's really standing on the stage or just waiting in the wings. Tessa didn't reply. We both understood. Some questions don't need answers. That night the Portland sky was still. The city kept moving. And so did I. In a way that no one else could define, but me. I don't know if you've ever gone through something like this. Being seen as the temporary choice in your own life story, traded away for some bigger plan you didn't even know existed. But if there's ever been a time you stayed silent because you thought your voice didn't matter, maybe we have something in common. What do you think about what I did? About choosing not to take revenge, but simply stepping off the stage they built without my consent? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments. And if you believe in honest, layered stories about family, dignity, and the quiet strength of those who seem the most fragile, don't forget to follow this channel for more journeys ahead. Sometimes, the quietest moments are the ones where a new chapter truly begins.